systems.
All right, everybody, it's Saturday night. Welcome back. You're listening to America Now. I'm Barb Adams. Thanks so much for joining me. Well, I've got a great show lined up tonight, beginning with a discussion on artificial intelligence in the first hour. Then in the second hour, we're going to learn about altered states of consciousness. Finally, in the last hour, a frank discussion about slut-shaming and sexual violence. Hope you stay for the entire show, but if you miss any part, you can listen to this or any of my shows in their entirety on my website, radioamericanow.com, under archives. Well, a recent study released by the University of Oxford said that 47% of the world's jobs are set to be automated within 20 years or less. Robot takeover of the workplace is speeding up, with robots leading the second machine age. Creativity is going to be key in preserving your jobs. But in the end, it remains to be seen if we're going to be able to control our ever-expanding technology or end up with singularity. Is our future one of the Jetsons or that of Terminator? Joining me now, as always, this first hour is author and former statewide prosecutor and Deputy Attorney General of New Jersey, John J. Higgins. Together we form the nonpartisan Practical Solutions for America. We ask you join us here on air each week and on Facebook to discuss the challenges facing present-day America. If you'd like to call in and join tonight's discussion, the number 800-259-5791. Again, that's 800-259-5791. John, you still out there, or have you been replaced by a robot yet?
Well, if I was, they haven't notified me yet.
Well, I hope it is you, because I do appreciate the value of human communication at this point. You know, the clever bot and all of that, it's getting better and better. But I have to say, I still like that personal touch with it all. You know, John, the automation and robots, though, are expected to take over human jobs in the next decade at a very rapid pace. What are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, from some of my experience when I worked in the industry, you know, machinery was taking over a lot of jobs. Actually, one of my first industrial jobs was operating a waste treatment system and a painting system. We were the first place in the world to use water-based paint that we electrified to 90,000 volts and then put it on parts as they went by on an assembly line off these things called Ransburg discs. So, you know, I've had some exposure to this kind of thing, and it got rid of jobs, you know, slowly but surely, that, you know, you could automate stuff rather than have, you know, people stand there with a spray gun in their hand and do that. By the time I left, we were developing powder coating systems that weren't even using liquefied paint. They were using, you know, dry plastic powder to coat things, and I think that's really what's going on with the auto industry. I think they basically do powder coating today. Robots were something that were coming up in the background that they could do, you know, the more fine kind of work that used to be done by hand. I don't know how that all worked out, because there's certain limitations to what a machine can do, because it may not be able to adapt, you know, to changes in atmosphere and that kind of thing that would affect, you know, painting operations. But I think over time, you know, as artificial intelligence gets better, it makes that more possible. I've been thinking, too, that, you know, there's different levels of intelligence. You know, machines and computers are certainly good at, you know, compiling data and, you know, doing a lot of mathematical kinds of things. I just don't know that they ever will get to the point that they can do creativity. And when you think about creativity, you know, sometimes creativity is making a choice of different options. You know, they may be able to get into that area of intelligence, but I'm somewhat doubtful that they will ever get to the point that they can do creation by, you know, analyzing something, or you get that spark at 3 o'clock in the morning that sometimes is the quantum leap that, you know, changes, you know, theories or, problem solving.
Yeah, and on one hand, when you're talking about the creativity, you're right, that's where we do still have this advantage. The one thing that robots possibly could do, and if we do get to that point of singularity, is where they start redesigning themselves. That's the possibility. Whether that's considered creative or not, I'm not sure. But you're right, it's possible with all of this automation. It frees us up to be more creative and hopefully be creative enough to continue to create new jobs for ourselves so that we don't have to do more of the menial type of positions. Although, when you think about the way robots are already in our workplace, they're doing anesthesiology jobs. They're doing surgery. They're bartenders, things along those lines. But even FedEx is talking about flying their planes without pilots now. Robots can do those types of things. Librarians, service jobs. So we'd have to get very creative to create a whole new set of positions for ourselves.
Right. But there's even a more problematic question that starts coming up, and that is, what is the morality about a lot of what a machine can do or not do? I mean, I think we've all seen the science fiction movies where, it becomes a supercomputer that, decides that, humans are inefficient. Or, I remember in the 60s there was a movie called Colossus or something, where it was a supercomputer at the U.S. that was going to control our nuclear capabilities, and then it found out that there was one in Russia or the Soviet Union back in the day, and the two of them had to be connected. And then once they were connected, they were basically in charge of the world.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Or HAL in 2001, they start thinking, what, you're not very effective as a human. I just think you need to go away. That is a possibility. Of course, when you think about all of this, it's who's writing the algorithms for all of these programs that go into these computers. That's where we have to start looking back to. Because the people who write all the programs for the computers, for all this automation, they're the ones really in control.
Yes. And when I say, the morality of it is we probably could clone humans today. And, so there has to be legislation that has come about that basically forbids people from doing that. I'm not so sure that we'll be so far ahead of the curve on artificial intelligence that we'll even have the wherewithal to know which way it's going to come that would need to be controlled. I mean, human beings as warriors, I would think, are somewhat limited in their capabilities. You make machines capable of fighting war. I mean, you could have an army under your control without, all of a sudden it sneaks up and that army is in place, in control.
Well, I know we're working on that type of stuff. I mean, even just look at the drones we have currently and how much they're proliferating at this point. We're moving so quickly. Technology is advancing so quickly. Even if we wanted to put controls in like you're talking about, John, with laws and things like that, I don't think we can keep up with it that fast. By the time we get something going, get something written, we're already way down the road, and we're going to be heading to a break here. But, think about the smartphones, the smart watches. How all of this intelligence is just expanding so rapidly. All right, we're going to continue this discussion on the other side of the break here on America Now. Stay with us. All right, everybody. John Higgins and I discussing artificial intelligence here this hour. And John, we're talking about this automation and whether we can control it or not. And I'm wondering, if we can really harness it to provide more social good than harm. We were talking about the drones and military applications and all that. But I'm wondering, if we really put our minds to it and get creative, we could do a lot of good with this as well.
Oh, absolutely. If we could figure out how to do, all the menial tasks in life with having a machine take care of it, it could really free up people to do a lot of other things. If you observe what goes on, during the course of a week, you're at least out here in New Jersey, garbage isn't picked up by garbage men anymore. You know, the driver drives up, gets alongside of the container's picked up by a forklift kind of thing, thrown into the back of the truck, and then off they go. And I don't think it's long before the automobile is going to be controlled by GPS units somehow. And I'm not sure that we're going to, in 10 or 15 years, that we'll even be driving our own cars. We'll just be driven around, you know, by whatever that machine and that intelligence is. And if you take that further, I mean, you could take, you know, these machines to do farming. You could have them do, you know, construction. I mean, you wouldn't need iron workers up at the top of a skyscraper. It could, you know, just use a machine up there rather than, you know, put human lives at risk. Now, of course, what humans do after, you know, that becomes a little bit more of the problem. And the only issue I see with that is that we probably will have to change the whole economic model to compensate for it.
Yeah, and as well, John, idle hands are the devil's playground. If a lot of people, you know, sit around and think, well, now what do I do? There'll be enough people that will say, hey, great, free time and all of that. But what are you going to do? You know, and again, we're talking about being creative to keep a job. There was a recent article in the Wall Street Journal that asked that question, is your job creative enough to resist robot automation? And it was amazing, the types of jobs that would survive versus the ones that won't. And I was shocked. I was actually very pleased. Radio broadcasters make the list of can't be replaced. Of all things.
Well, I'm from the legal field, and I know that it's only been in the last few years that now they have computers going through, you know, massive files of discovery that they're supposedly finding all the information they want. But, you know, I have some personal experience in that, is that when we would seize computers, in the beginning, I would get the hard drive, and I would have my detectives go through it because they knew the case. As time was going on, what the computer section wanted was me to give them a list of search words to you know, go through what was on the hard disk. And one of the few times that I lost my cool in my office was that I had one of the computer guys come back to me. He was the head of the unit. And he came back and told me there was nothing of evidential value on the computer, and I had 300 emails that were of evidential value that he had no idea what he was looking for. And, you know, so some things, you know, will work fine, but I think that there's still areas that you really do need a human brain to be able to compensate, particularly for the chicanery of a human brain.
Well, that's a good point. And as well, when you're talking about chicanery, there's always going to be those out there that want to use this type of technology for their own gain or ill purposes, John.
Yes, but one of the benefits of everything being somewhat computerized, it will create, quote, a paper, unquote, trail. You know, when there's not cash transfers and all of that kind of thing, all those transactions then become much more traceable. So, I mean, I always crack up with these people who try to do all this embezzlement and whatever. It's, you know, there's money in, there's money out, there's ways of verifying, there's things that, you know, lead a trail that, you know, you can follow up on. But, you know, I think that's where I was going just a few minutes ago in terms of having to change the economic system. You can't have all of these people with no jobs. So somewhere along the line, we've got to change our thinking on how an economy will work in a country. If the machines are taking care of all the menial labors, well, it's not even menial. They may be taking over much more creative kind of roles that we see today. You know, I don't think you can have this, you know, pursuit of maximum profits in that. You'll probably have to change that.
Yeah, when you're talking about this, too, changing the whole economic system, I can see it. But here we go with one of your favorite topics, corporations. Because look at it this way, you know, who's going to benefit the most again from all of this? These corporations can look at all of this and say, wow, we don't need to pay all these people. We can offset rising labor costs by automating things and having robots take over.
Absolutely, but what maybe the sword that bites them is that, at least from my perspective, many of the CEOs, I think that they really are playing golf and flying from meeting to meeting as opposed to actually performing any real tasks. So they may be a class that become absolutely redundant.
Well, it's possible, but, I keep thinking, once upon a time we had, the employers, they all worked as a team. Everybody was dependent on one another. But now the bottom line is money. Money prevails. And this is, the future of robot labor is the future possibly and probably of capitalism. If you go back and look at some of the stuff that Karl Marx wrote way back when, there was a very obscure part of one of his papers that was about something about the fragment of the machines, where he's talking about this is kind of the end result. Automation is an integral part of our system of capitalism.
Right, but taken to the nth degree, or much further down the road, I mean, many of the jobs in the corporation may be easily replaced, particularly up at the top, not necessarily all at the bottom, because if a machine becomes creative enough to think of what they should do to maximize profits and whatever and minimize risks, isn't that really the role of what a CEO does?
Well, I agree with you, but I still think somehow if they've got control over this technology, they're still going to get their money out of it somehow. Even if they lay themselves off. Hey, time is money, right? So they're going to have more time on their hands, even if they don't have to be the CEO. All the more golf games for them.
Well, my bigger fear is that when whoever manufactures the military versions of these machines, we've always had the protection, and we've discussed that before, that, American soldiers are not going to exercise extreme martial law against their own citizenry because they're friends, relatives, and whatever. But does a machine have any loyalty to anyone?
Absolutely not, except for the person who put it together, possibly, and programmed it. All right, we're going to continue this discussion on the other side of the break. All right, everybody, welcome back. You're listening to America Now. John J. Higgins and I discussing artificial intelligence. Right before the break, John, when you were mentioning the military, the militarization, actually, using these robots. We've got drones, and they have been working on the robots for quite some time. They've been adding the prosthetics and now creating towards the warrior robots and things. But my big concern, and probably yours and many people's as well, is who's going to control these warrior robots?
Absolutely, and that's where you're probably going to need some kind of laws or whatever put in place so that there are, controls that make sure that, some rascal doesn't, go on a rampage or off the reservation, isn't that the military term, and then start using them for their own gain. It's certainly something that, is a danger, but, it's not an unknown danger in some ways. I mean, we've dealt with the nuclear thing in some form as well. So I'm sure that there is some way of putting in those controls. I'm just hoping that our politicians aren't in somebody's pocket, that they get sold some bill of goods and move down a path that can't be reversed.
I can't believe I just heard you say that, John, that our politicians could possibly be in somebody's pocket. Oh, my goodness. I mean, really? You think that's possible, John?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons that everybody, I think, has got to be vigilant and aware of, what these potential dangers are. I mean, and that's why there should be transparency, and, we should know what's going on with what the government does.
Yeah, the thing is, when we start getting into this kind of stuff, again, with this lawmaking and all of that about controlling it, how would we even enforce some of these laws and stuff, especially when it comes to if they already put these robots and things in place?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I do have some faith in that, there still are people who are responsible and forward thinking to some degree, so that sometimes the occasion, changes what goes on that, people rise to it, and then they surprise you with doing good.
Well, yeah, and I believe that too as well, obviously, and that's what my intention would be, that this would work to our benefit. There would be good coming from all of this. But, it's coming so quickly again. And when you think about it, Chris Weil talked about it happening within the next decade or so, that we could hit technological singularity, where these machines actually start becoming, lives unto themselves, surpassing us, their intelligence levels.
Well, I always have a basic question, and maybe it's more like, what came first, the chicken and the egg? But, when we talk about intelligence, I am not sure that machines will ever get to the point that they can be creative on their own. The old thing of, information in, information out. I mean, they can process a lot of it. They can have a lot of options. But, most things in life, it's just not dealing with the options. It's, things unfold in ways that alter how you project from, this point in time forward. And I'm not sure that machines are ever going to be able to do that any better than humans.
But when you talk about the singularity, and when they're talking about something beyond just artificial intelligence, they're talking strong artificial intelligence, strong AI. They're talking about the computers, or the networks, or even the robots, theoretically becoming, again, redesigning themselves, which could actually have that runaway effect. An intelligence explosion, a different type of intelligence like you're talking about, but where these smart machines actually design successive generations of increasingly powerful minds, if you will, creating this type of intelligence that would far exceed human intellectual capacity and control at that point. This is the runaway effect. And yeah, you can't really, it wouldn't be apples to apples, different type of intelligence, but still, such a super intelligence could be impossible for us to even comprehend at this point.
Well, like I say, there's that fundamental question always to me is, and now I'm going to sound mystical, and I try never to do that, but, is the soul ultimately behind, what is really human intelligence? Or is it just a bunch of facts that get processed? And, that energy, I think, is exclusive to us, and I'm not sure the machine is ever going to replicate it. Sure, it could become a problem because it puts certain controls in that, like the Colossus story, where, they communicated back and forth between two countries and then, locked themselves and started protecting themselves. But I'm still a little reluctant to think it will ever get there.
I go with you, John, and thanks for bringing that up. You're right. There's no replacement for the human spirit. There is none. Even with these, no matter how intelligent they get, there's always that spark within us.
Right.
And the emotions. I mean, they're not going to have those. Well, it's possible they can express them somewhat, I guess, from my understanding, but they're still not really going to be able to have them. They may have an artificial emotion, but it's still not going to be the same as ours. And hopefully, like, in the Terminator movies and all the other movies, Matrix with Skynet and all that, hopefully we still prevail because we do have that edge, the human spirit. Yes,
and I certainly think machines can mimic, that they'll certainly be able to do. But I think to get to the next level, I still think that's a divine spark that's put into beings that, a machine just can't get to. Now, the danger becomes if you find some way of biologically, connecting into the machinery, but now maybe you'd be in another place. But I think that just, the mechanical and electrical, impulses on their own, I don't think are going to be capable of that.
I'm glad you brought that up because I wrote an article, I guess it was about a year or two ago for the network here, on mind melds. We're actually doing those now, John. Hate to tell you this, but we're actually kind of connecting things along those lines. And that's where it starts getting a little scary.
Well, that may be the place that you start with the legislation.
Yeah, we better.
But I also have faith in humanity in that, we are creative in the bizarrest ways. I don't know how much chess you ever play, but whenever I've played chess with people that are better than I, sometimes I will do something they absolutely do not expect. I will throw away pieces, just to jumble up the whole thing so that I set them off. And I'm not so sure a machine would ever think to do that.
Element of surprise. Yes, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if you think too, some of our real geniuses, right? They get the thought at 3:00 in the morning in the middle of a dream. They see a butterfly flying. There's nothing to do with the problem they're solving, but somehow they make a connection that I don't know that a machine would ever be able to do either.
Well, it's possible, except they would never shut down to sleep either. They'd keep thinking on stuff. I don't know if that's good or bad. Because sometimes when I don't get sleep, I don't think quite as well, and they'd have the advantage there. We're heading to another break, John. All right, we will continue this on the other side here on America Now. Stay with us. All right, everybody, welcome back. John J. Higgins and I discussing artificial intelligence in America now and in the future. And John, whether we like it or not, we are progressing that way very quickly. And I think, we've been talking about some of the negatives and all that, but let's talk about the positives now on this end of things. Really, there are a lot of positives to this. We'll have a lot more free time than ever before. Once we're freed from the bonds of some of this more menial type labor that we've had to be doing, it'll free us up for more social thought and even hopefully cooperation in working towards a better world.
Absolutely. All these jobs that are dangerous we could replace so that they don't become, taking people's lives. Although I do enjoy driving, it can be pretty frustrating in New Jersey particularly. I'm sure there's the complaints across the country about Jersey drivers. But if you had a car that drove itself, all you do is get in it in the morning. You could read a paper on the way to work. You could do all kinds of other things rather than, honking at the guy in front of you who's always going too slow and the guy behind you is always going too fast. So, that kind of thing would free up some stuff. And then, if you think about, how some of the areas of the country and the world are like in bad shape because they don't have enough of something, the machinery and the intelligence could be used to help, take care of those things, make sure there's enough of a food supply, make sure that there's enough clean water. If people were freed up to kind of, think and solve those sorts of problems. I think you've got to be careful in terms of, the greedy ones that are trying to, acquire stuff through chicanery like we talk about and whatever. But, they'd have a harder time doing it because there'd be more, there'd be the paper trails everywhere. And, that would have a chilling effect on any of that.
I'd like to think that the massive profits that might come from all of this automation would actually lure more investment into different types of companies and even spur more ideas.
Absolutely. And we could progress as human beings and not be so, stuck in the survival mode. The 20th century, at least in the first world countries, life has improved tremendously from what it was 150 years ago. 150 years ago, if you wanted to survive, you basically had to have your own little farm, and that's a lot of work with very little payoff. So most of those things have kind of been resolved. And, technology's allowed us to, do much more in medicine and, quality of life issues that have really improved as well.
Yeah, I really wonder about what the effects all of this ultimately will have on capitalism. Would it bring about the end of capitalism? Because really what you're talking about is if we move in this forward direction, we're kind of talking about a robotic utopia.
Well, I still like to think of the robotics as servants to us, and, I think that if we get out of this, dog-eat-dog kind of world, listen, most of the problems with crime is that, there's two kinds of criminals. There's the ones who are just greedy, they can't get enough, and then there's the others who don't have enough. So if we get rid of that element that, don't have enough and stabilize their lives with food, shelter, medical care and, some kind of basic quality of life that isn't subsistence, a lot of that would go away.
Now you're talking more socialistic, right? Yeah.
Well, I think ultimately that's what happens. I think that pure capitalism on its own doesn't exist. I don't think it can survive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, social democracy, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The military is always a socialism program, isn't it?
Exactly.
You tell people to go risk their lives for a pittance to protect those who have.
Yep, exactly. I like going back, though. I'm still thinking about those cars that drive themselves. I love to go for rides in cars. I can drive, obviously. I'm a very good driver, but I prefer not to have to drive. That would be wonderful. And the idea that it would get rid of road rage, probably, because really everybody'd be sitting back and just relaxed.
Well, there wouldn't be accidents because the machines are probably better at it than what we are.
Yeah, exactly. And, airplanes, ships, all of these types of things. It could really take a lot of fear out of this society and around the world, hopefully.
Yes, absolutely. And even in law enforcement, things would be probably exercised more fairly. It wouldn't be that, the criminal is ticked off at the cop because of race or socioeconomic status or whatever. They would just have to deal with whatever it was and learn to obey. Does a machine really need to shoot somebody because it's afraid of being harmed?
Nope, not at all, unless it goes crazy. There was a movie I watched one time. Oh, it was on TV. It was on the classic, I'm trying to think, it was Yulbra, Westworld. It's about this cowboy sheriff kind of thing or something in this amusement park or something, but he goes berserk. The robot goes crazy and, starts taking care of everybody. Unless you have that situation, you may always have a blip here and there with an occasional robot fritzing out, but other than that, you're right, most of this would run very smoothly.
Right, and listen, as a novelist, we love to create the fear and the drama, but, computerization where everybody has a computer in their home so far hasn't gotten us that we're being mind controlled by the machine. So, I think that, as life goes on, we will adapt to whatever those changes are, and I think they will make life better.
You mentioned not being mind controlled, but we are being data controlled. That's the one thing, with all of this, when we have all the computers in our homes and our smartwatches, our smartphones and all of this, it's all connected. And again, we know the type of data gathering that's going on there.
Right. And of course there's risks to that, but so far they haven't gone to fruition. And I think every generation has a certain level of fear about what is coming next. And although it does happen, at times, this has always been my saying, is that evil wins in the beginning but never wins over the long term. And so if there's a little blip that comes up and it becomes a problem, somehow we rise to the occasion and we fix whatever that issue is.
Yep, so as the rise of the machines come, hopefully the rise of human spirit will also match it and equal it and surpass it. And we will just all continue to evolve positively into a really great future.
Yeah. I since I live in a 150-year-old building, I often think about, what life was like back in those days. To get across the country, you had to take a train. Before that, my God, it was a trip filled with peril, and not in a dramatic sense, in a real sense.
Yeah.
You didn't make that. You didn't make it to the other side. People died in that. Now today, You know, you hop in a car, you get in a bus, you get in a plane, you get in a train, and, you know, within 2 or 3 days, at the max, you're at the other side of the country.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, we have. We've always adapted. We've always moved forward, and we're not going to go backwards. That's never a good thing anyway, to look back. So, well, here's to the future of the Jetsons or something that we haven't even imagined yet.
Yeah, and you know, like we discussed, it is coming. You know, we adapt to it. I mean, how much better is your life now that you have a computer in your house, that you have access to all this information? I remember struggling having to go to the libraries and do all this crazy research by looking up individual books, trying to find a quote for a paper. Now, you go online and you have 1,000 of them.
Yeah, and librarians are on the list of to be replaced, by the way. And even the books, you know, we can read the books on any of, you know, on our pads or phones or, you know, whatever, Kindles. You know, it all, and I hate to admit it, but you know, as I sit here and we're doing this, I've got my smartphone right here, and I can be doing multitasking the whole time. You know, the computer screen's up in front, and all these other things going on. It really it is a pretty amazing world if we allow it to be, and if we kind of focus that direction. And I think that's the whole thing. We have to make sure we continue to look forward in a positive way. John, as always, thanks for joining me.
Okay, have a good night.
All right, you as well. All right, everybody, America Now continues after the top of the hour break.